That afternoon taught me something ugly about love. It can vanish long before anyone speaks the words. When I got home early, I found my wife's best friend standing frozen in the hallway, her face pale as a confession. She whispered, "She's gone. I can explain." And in that silence, I realized the woman I'd married had left me for another man. I had walked into my own house a husband. I stood there a stranger. And the woman standing before me was hiding a secret even more dangerous than betrayal. My wife Catherine was a brilliant architect and, I thought, my partner for life. On a Tuesday afternoon, I discovered she'd run off with another man. But as Megan stood trembling in my hallway, I sensed a darker truth beneath the betrayal, something she hadn't yet dared to say. I met Catherine 10 years ago at a rooftop party in the city, the kind of night where everyone talked too fast and the skyline felt like a promise. She was 31 then, already a rising star at her architecture firm, the woman who could sketch a building on a cocktail napkin and make it look inevitable. I was a contracts attorney who spent his days untangling fine print, and when she laughed at one of my dry observations about the zoning code, I knew I was in trouble. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the water, and I believed with absolute certainty that I had found my person. For years, that certainty held. Our life together looked enviable from the outside. The restored Victorian house we renovated together, the dinner parties where Catherine commanded the table with stories of impossible clients, the quiet Sundays when we'd walk the farmer's market hand in hand. If you had asked me 6 months ago to describe my marriage in a single word, I would have said solid, rock solid. But solid things don't collapse without warning, they just hide their fractures well. The first subtle shift happened after Catherine's firm won a major contract designing a new performing arts center downtown. She threw herself into the project with an intensity I admired but increasingly felt locked out of. Late nights at the office became overnight work sessions. Weekend site visits stretched into trips that didn't include me. When I expressed concern, she told me I was being insecure, that she was building something meaningful, that I should be proud. And I was proud. So proud that I ignored the growing distance, the way her phone never left her hand, the new perfume she started wearing that I hadn't given her. Megan entered our orbit 3 years earlier. She was Catherine's college roommate, a freelance photographer with a gift for appearing at exactly the right moment with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. Catherine called her a sister. I called her a permanent fixture at our dinner table. She helped Catherine pick out my birthday gifts. She stayed over in the guest room on nights when the three of us talked until midnight about art and ambition and the strange loneliness of adult friendship. She was part of the scaffolding of our marriage, and I trusted her as completely as Catherine did. But here's the thing about scaffolding. It can hold up the truth, or it can hide what's crumbling behind it. The canceled client dinner that sent me home early was supposed to happen at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. I'd been ready to spend 2 hours discussing liability clauses with a developer who couldn't read a contract, but his assistant called at 4:30 to push it to Thursday. Relieved, I decided to surprise Catherine with an early evening. I picked up Thai food from the place she loved, the one with the ridiculous parking situation, and I drove home humming along to a radio station that played the hits from our first year together. I remember turning onto our street and noticing that the curtains were drawn in the front window, which was unusual for 5 in the afternoon. I remember parking in the driveway and thinking the house looked too still, like a photograph instead of a living place. I used my key. I stepped inside and called her name. The echo of my own voice was the first thing that felt wrong. Then I saw Megan at the top of the stairs. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her hand was gripping the banister as if the floor had tilted beneath her, and her face was the color of snow before it touches the ground. The house around her was silent in a way I had never heard before. No music, no television, no sound of Catherine humming in the kitchen, just stillness, heavy and absolute. That was when Megan spoke the words that hollowed out my chest. "She's gone. I can explain." I didn't move. The Thai food bag dangled from my hand, growing cold. And in that terrible, suspended moment, I understood that the explanation she was about to give me would unmake everything I thought I knew, not just about Catherine, but about the woman standing 3 feet away, whose eyes held a secret far darker than infidelity. Megan walked me through the hallway like a nurse guiding a patient into a room where bad news waited. I let her. The Thai food bag slipped from my fingers onto the floor, and neither of us bent to pick it up. When we reached the kitchen, I saw the half-packed suitcase open on the table, Catherine's jewelry box tipped on its side, emptied into a zippered pouch that still held the small diamond earrings I'd given her on our 3rd anniversary. Beside the pouch lay a stack of folded sweaters, the ones she only wore when she wanted to feel pretty without trying. Megan stood by the counter with her arms wrapped around herself, as if her own body had become a stranger. "Catherine's been seeing someone," Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A developer she met through the Arts Center project. His name is Daniel. It started 8 months ago. 8 months. I did the math instantly, the way a brain does when it has nothing left to protect. Every late night at the office, every weekend trip, every distracted glance at her phone while I talked about my day, 8 months of architecture designed to keep me outside the rooms of her real life. I thought about the new perfume. I thought about the night I tried to surprise her at the firm with dinner and she'd been flustered, almost annoyed, telling me she had a client meeting across town. That meeting had been Daniel. That meeting had always been Daniel. "How long have you known?" I asked. Megan closed her eyes. 4 months. The kitchen tilted. Megan, the woman Catherine called a sister, the woman who had eaten at my table, laughed at my jokes, borrowed my books, and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to my wife. She had been carrying this secret for 4 months. She had sat across from me at Saturday brunches and poured wine at Tuesday dinners, and the whole time she had known that the marriage I was living inside was already a ruin. "I wanted to tell you," she said. 100 times I wanted to tell you. But Catherine begged me not to. She said she needed to find the right moment, that telling you too soon would destroy you before she'd figured out how to leave cleanly. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped my throat. "Cleanly, that's a beautiful word for it." Megan didn't flinch. She looked at me the way someone looks at a wound they know they helped create, and something in her expression shifted from guilt to something rower. I saw it then, the thing I'd missed for years. The way her eyes lingered on my face a beat too long at dinner parties. The way she always remembered small details about my cases, my favorite authors, the name of my first dog. The way her voice softened when she said my name in a room full of people who said it carelessly. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "I should have told you a lot of things." The silence between those words was a doorway. I knew, before she opened her mouth again, that what came next would change the shape of the room forever. Megan stepped closer, close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, the same one Catherine had always called too pretty for a best friend. Her hand trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not Catherine's best friend, but a woman who had been hiding something so long that the hiding had become a kind of prison. "Adam," she said, "I've been in love with you for almost as long as I've known you. Since before you and Catherine were engaged. I never said anything because I thought she was what you wanted. I stepped back. I became the friend. I watched you build a life with her, and I told myself that was enough, that loving someone from a distance was better than not loving them at all. But then she started talking about Daniel, and I felt something I'm not proud of. I felt hope. And I know how terrible that sounds, standing here in the wreckage of your marriage, but I can't carry this lie anymore." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. I should have been furious. A part of me was furious at Catherine for the betrayal, at Megan for the concealment, at myself for the blindness. But beneath the fury was something else. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the raw, disorienting vulnerability of a man who had just lost his wife and discovered, in the same devastating hour, that he had never really seen the woman standing closest to the disaster. I looked at the open suitcase. At the bare hook near the door where Catherine's wedding ring used to hang, at Megan's face, pale and terrified and braver than I had ever been in my life. "I know you need time," Megan said. "I know this is too much. I should leave." She turned toward the door, and I heard my own voice before my brain caught up with the decision. "Don't go." She stopped. The air in the kitchen grew very still. "Just for a while," I said. "The house feels like a place I can't face alone. And right now, the only person I trust is already here." Megan didn't leave. She made tea while I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty hook where Catherine's ring used to hang. We didn't speak for almost an hour. The silence felt less like absence and more like a language we were learning, two people who had always spoken through the filter of my wife and were now discovering each other's unmediated voices. When she finally sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug she had bought Catherine for her 35th birthday, her face carried the weight of a confession that hadn't finished. I could see it in the way she kept her eyes on the steam rising from the tea, avoiding mine not out of guilt, but out of the terrible effort of organizing words that had been waiting years to find their shape. "There's more you should know," she said. "About Catherine, about why I stayed silent." I waited. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's car pulled into a driveway and the headlights swept across the wall like a searchlight looking for something lost. Megan took a breath. "Catherine knew how I felt about you. She knew before you and I ever met. I told her years ago that I'd met someone at a party. I didn't say it was you specifically, but she figured it out after she brought you home. She recognized my description. And she never told me she knew. She just filed it away." The words settled into me like cold water through fabric. Catherine had known. All those dinner parties, all those weekends when Megan stayed over, all those moments when Megan laughed at my jokes with a warmth that felt familial. My wife had been watching a woman in love with her husband, and she had said nothing, done nothing, simply let it happen under her roof. "Did she ever say anything to you?" I asked. "About a year ago, she started making comments. Little ones. She'd mention how happy we were, how lucky she felt, how she always knew she'd find the right person first. She'd look at me when she said it. Not cruel exactly, just certain. As if my feelings for you were a piece of gossip she kept in her pocket, something she could pull out and examine whenever she needed reminding that she held all the cards." Megan's voice didn't break, but it came close. "When she started seeing Daniel, she told me before anyone else. She said it was because she trusted me. But I think it was something else. I think she wanted a witness. Someone who understood exactly what she was throwing away, because I had spent years wanting exactly what she was discarding." I stood up from the table, not because I wanted to leave, but because the room suddenly felt too small for everything it contained. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark lawn, the same grass I had mowed every Sunday while Catherine sat on the porch sketching ideas for buildings she would never build with me. "Then why did she ask you to pack her things?" I said quietly. "Why send you here today?" Megan was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was steadier, as if she had reached the hardest part and decided to walk through it without flinching. "Because she wanted me to see what I was finally allowed to have. She wanted me to walk into your empty house, touch her jewelry, fold her sweaters, and know that the man I loved was now available on her terms. It was supposed to be a gift she could feel generous about. The grand gesture of a woman who had everything and was willing to hand down her leftovers. That was Catherine, I realized. Not the woman I had married, but the woman she had always been when I wasn't looking. The architect who designed people into rooms she controlled, who drew blueprints of relationships with her needs at the center and everyone else arranged neatly around the edges. "She's not coming back, is she?" I asked. "No, she and Daniel are flying to Chicago tomorrow morning. She said she'd have the rest of her things picked up by movers next week. The house is yours. The life is yours." She considered that fair. Another beautiful word for a ruin. I turned from the window and looked at Megan again. She was still sitting at the table, her mug untouched, her face raw with the effort of telling the truth after so many years of lying. She was not beautiful in that moment. She was too exhausted for beauty. But she was real in a way Catherine had never been, all edges and openness, a woman who had tried to love from the shadows because the light had always belonged to someone else. "I don't know what to do now," I said. "Neither do I. I've never known. That's the problem." My phone buzzed on the counter. Catherine's name lit up the screen. The sight of it after everything felt like a stranger's name, a billing notice from a company I no longer did business with. I answered. Catherine's voice came through brisk and organized, the same tone she used for conference calls about zoning permits. "Adam, I'm glad you're home. Megan should have explained things. I know this is sudden, but it's been coming for a long time. Daniel and I have a flight in the morning, and I need to make sure you're not going to do anything dramatic. The house is in both our names, obviously, but I'm not contesting anything. Just don't throw my stuff on the lawn. In the background, I heard a man's voice say something I couldn't make out, and Catherine laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was the laugh of someone who had already moved on, who was already in a new room with a new person while I stood in the wreckage of our old one. I said nothing. The silence stretched until Catherine's voice sharpened. "Adam, are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "I was just looking at the hook where you used to keep your ring." She paused, just briefly. Then she said, "Well, I'll have the movers call next week. Give the keys to Megan, she'll handle things." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the blank screen and felt something unexpected. Not grief, not even anger, just a strange, hollow clarity, as if the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving had clicked quietly into place. "She's already gone," I said, more to myself than to Megan. "She was gone a long time before she walked out that door." Megan stood and walked over to me. She didn't try to touch me. She didn't offer words of comfort. She just stood beside me, facing the same window, looking at the same dark lawn, as if we were two people who had been stranded in the same storm and had finally stopped pretending the rain wasn't real. "So what happens now?" she asked. And I turned to her, this woman who had hidden in plain sight for years, who had loved me without hope and helped destroy my marriage without intention, and I felt the floor of my old life give way completely. "Now," I said, "we figure out what's true and what was just the architecture." That first night, Megan didn't sleep in the guest room. She stayed on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket Catherine had bought from a boutique in the Arts District, and I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with my wife for 8 years, staring at the ceiling as if the cracks in the plaster might spell out an answer. Around 3 in the morning, I heard her get up and make tea again. I didn't join her. I was still sorting through what I felt, not love, not yet, but something that might have been the beginning of trust, which is more dangerous and more honest. The next morning, we sat at the kitchen table with the half-packed suitcase still open between us, and Megan said something that shifted the ground entirely. She left something for me, in the jewelry pouch. I didn't see it until after you went to bed. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. It was Catherine's handwriting, neat and architectural, the same hand that had written love notes on birthday cards and shopping lists on the refrigerator. The letter was short. "Megan, I know you've been in love with my husband since before I married him. I've always known. And I've always resented you for it, not because it threatened me, but because it made me feel like the villain in a story I wanted to be the hero of. So here's your happy ending. Take care of him. Don't pretend this was your idea." It was mine. I read it twice. The first time, I felt the cold satisfaction of confirmation. Catherine hadn't just left me. She'd staged the exit like a director striking a set, placing Megan exactly where she knew she'd be standing when the curtain fell. The second time, I felt something warmer. Not anger at Catherine, though that would come later in waves. Relief. Because Megan hadn't schemed for this. She hadn't undermined my marriage. She had been a piece on Catherine's board, just as I had been. And now we were both standing in the wreckage of someone else's design, free for the first time to see each other without the filter of guilt. "I almost didn't show you," Megan said. "I thought you'd think I was just trying to make her look worse, but you deserve to know that what I told you last night wasn't part of her plan. It was the one thing she didn't script. I didn't confess because she gave me permission. I confessed because I was tired of being used." That was the pivot. I looked at her across the table, this woman who had spent years loving me from a distance, while my wife wielded her secret like a private joke. And I realized that the bravest thing anyone had ever done for me wasn't the confession. It was the refusal to let Catherine own it. Megan had stolen the ending back. We didn't kiss that morning. We didn't fall into each other's arms like characters in a film that wanted to spare us the hard work of actual recovery. Instead, we called a real estate attorney friend of mine and started the long, unglamorous process of disentangling my life from Catherine's. Megan helped pack the rest of the jewelry. She labeled boxes. She made calls to the movers that Catherine had promised to arrange, then didn't. She did not, at any point, try to fill the space Catherine had left. She simply stood beside me while I learned to occupy it again. The divorce finalized 4 months later. Catherine sent a single text. "I hope you're both very happy. I meant what I wrote." I deleted it without replying. Megan and I had dinner that night at a quiet Italian place, the same one where Catherine and I had celebrated our last anniversary, but it didn't feel haunted. It felt reclaimed. We talked about ordinary things, her latest photography project, a court case I'd won, the way spring had arrived too early and confused the cherry trees. And at the end of the meal, she reached across the table and took my hand, not as a declaration, just as a question. "I'm ready to stop being a character in her story," she said. "Are you?" I was. The next chapter wasn't dramatic. It was slow mornings and honest conversations and the strange, unfamiliar ease of being with someone who didn't need me to play a role. 3 months after that, Megan moved into the house. Not because I asked her to fill the silence, but because the silence finally felt like ours. She brought her cameras and her tea collection and her habit of humming while she read. I gave her the hook where Catherine's ring had hung, and she hung a small framed photograph there, not of us, but of the empty hallway at twilight, a picture she'd taken on the night everything fell apart. "Why that one?" I asked. "Because it's the moment I stopped lying." That was the surprising truth I hadn't expected to find in the rubble. Not that Megan loved me, which she'd told me plainly enough, but that she had been imprisoned by secrets just as much as I'd been imprisoned by trust, and that Catherine's cruel gift had, in the end, set us both free. The marriage I'd mourned wasn't a marriage. It was a blueprint drawn by someone who saw people as walls and windows and load-bearing supports, and the love that replaced it wasn't a rebound or a consolation prize. It was something built from the ground up, by two people who had finally stopped letting someone else design their lives. 1 year after that night in the hallway, I proposed to Megan. Not in a restaurant with an audience. Not with a grand gesture that someone else could claim credit for. I proposed in the kitchen, next to the table where I'd once found a half-packed suitcase, because I wanted the memory of that room to be overwritten with something real. She said yes, and the word sounded like a door closing on a house neither of us would ever have to enter again. That house, the one I'd shared with Catherine, eventually sold. Megan and I bought a place closer to the city, a bright, cluttered apartment with walls we painted ourselves and a view of a library she loved. The hook from the old hallway stayed empty. We never needed to fill it. I spent a long time wondering if I should have seen the cracks in my marriage sooner, but I eventually understood that some people are architects of control, not connection, and they design their exits long before anyone else notices the scaffolding. The real surprise wasn't the affair. It was discovering that the person I'd trusted as my wife's loyal friend had been trapped in the same structure, waiting for permission to speak. Catherine thought she was giving us a gift. She handed us a wreckage and called it generosity. But Megan and I learned something truer in the aftermath. The rooms someone builds for you can only hold you if you agree to live inside them. So I'll leave you with this question. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you missed the blueprint they were drawing around your life? And if you have, how did you finally start designing your own? If this story stayed with you, leave a like, share your experience in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories every week. I'll see you in the next one.